Recording in progress.
Short mandala. Okay, let's recite together. Sangye chodang choke chonam la changcho padu dani kepso je dage shinso ge pe sonam ge rola chancho sanye ruwa sho. Sangye chodang choke chonam la changcho padu dani kepso je Dage jin vi pe sonam ge rola benjo sanye rupa sho. Sangye chodang choki chonam la chang chom padu dani kep so je. Dage jin so vi pe sonam ge rola benjo sanye Samchen Tamchen Le Wa Dang Le Wei Ju Dang Ren Pa Ju Ji Samchen Tamchen Du Gao Dang Du Gao Ji Ju Dang Ren Wa Ju Ji Samchen Tamchen Du Gao Me Beng Le Wa Dang Me Ren Wa Ju Ji Samchen Tamchen Ji Ren Cha Dang Ni Dang Tang Nam La Ne Ba Ju Ji Samchen Tamchen De Wa Dang Le Wei Ju Dang Den Ba Ju Ji Samchen Tamchen Du Gao Dang Du Gao Ji Ju Dang De Wa Ju Ji Samchen Tamchen Du Gao Me Beng De Wa Dang Me De Wa Ju Ji Samchen Tamchen Ni Ren Cha Dang Ni Dang De Wei Tang Nam La Ne Ba Ju Ji Samchen Tamchen De Wa Dang De Wei Ju Dang Den Ba Ju Ji Samchen Tamchen Du Gao Dang Du Gao Ji Ju Dang De Wa Ju Ji Samchen Tamchen Du Gao Me Beng De Wa Dang Me De Wa Ju Ji Samchen Tamchen Ni Ren Cha Dang Ni Dang De Wei Tang Nam La Ne Ba Ju Ji Sazi Boke Chup Sing Me Do Tron Ri Ram Lin Si Ni De Gen Pa Di Sangye Shindu Mi De Ua Yi Jokun Nam La Shin La Cho Ba So Yidam Guru Ratna Mala Kanye Ya Taya Oh yeah. Olha, ci sembra carino fuori. Ora c'è zonga faccio per sonlero. Ne faccio. Che sono con ning bitan sera. Che sono con ning bitan. Geshe tamban nam jingak belams. Kenden tandu nam jingo des. Chidan ne she tag she bar chas. She song batar serwa. Che sono con ning bitan. Sanje chumden de kawak ne songbe. Sono ning bitan da ta karesenas. Chema bu somla ne ning but. Che sono con ning bitan. Che sono con ning bitan. Te karesne minjung der minjung. Ngebar jungas, koala ngebar junga, coba coba. Sorab ko ning bukare sanga ju tungele tegu yora. Ta ko tene karsene tunge yung yora. O de ko koale thar ko yora.
koala matare de karasin tanda ngazu koala shenja che de gora shenji chane ro sam sosu lule cha sosu cha shen ne lu lonjo la so ba kangal ba selen dever ba sem pa shubul num shubane pa shune ani di ma di chu di sem le tonga yo tende chi gora ki ko ko yo do o de de tume de te ku yo na tanda ngazu koala koye ne lu lonju kangal shenja yore chashin yore ti yudu zani chi tosin di ma di shindu namsa ne kondu danga ke da chado da desim da ti nyamu kangal yonde yorwa ngajente shindu yohe sora kunji nyingbu te gore sanje soya nyingbu te dungele te tere chinti dungele te chinti le samlo tanda mandri kone chishi le dungele kande sukudo ti dungele te kyo chima 예산 교화치마 전주다 이다 냐와를 소바 텐데 걔네 동해요도 대다 컨데스 제고래 때문에서 하다 밀리 깨버기나야 동해요로 봐 대수다 컨데스 제고래 동해다 자와시고요라 동해다 자와데 만주치리아 현자여서 결리 착명한 게 냐몬게 아니 랭에 뭐사든 동해용거라 어디인데 제가 소리고 님부터인데 가르치나 고연내 류론조를 써버려 네버리 좋아서 단단 아주 쉐버데 파차되거라 도나 매밤 야 민들시네 민내 류론조를 써버 셈파차되거라 어디래 봐 전통의 어다지 현자시에 되게 동해용거를 삼수 네버리 좋아 셈수 셈발로네 다때다 저신 네버도 제우도 삼 타라신 네버도 제고도 삼사 삼을때라 민중세가 와라 어디도 당아라도 신의 공개반 조사들 마음보여라 내송그 동엘랭 개반 조사 고외 동엘랭 개반 조사니여라 기부 총무도 지는 내송그 동엘랭 개반 정보라 내송스는 껴와 멤버송아 껴와지마 등등아 저 통대도 등등 통구도와 동네 마음도와 등등세네 다 람디나 시청원에 삼나 냐와이다 등등을 써봐 냐와다 이다다 등등 내송세라 껴와 멤버들 동네 마음보냐 관도와 뒤 삼루탄세 델리아 타르고도 삼사 델리 타르에 탑제고도 삼사 쟁고라면서 기부 충분히 주대 당보 어디 실험나 당보대 라서
So, here, as is taught by the great Je-lama Tsongkhapa, he says that he will explain then the essential points of all the scriptures of the conqueror, the path acclaimed by all excellent bodhisattvas, the gateway for the fortunate ones aspiring for liberation. And so here, when it says the essential points of all the scriptures of the conquerors, this is referring to a kind of attitude of renunciation. So in order to really proceed toward liberation, we first have to give rise to an attitude of like disillusionment, disenchantment with samsara. We have to see our situation within samsara as being within the nature of suffering. Now, normally we are very attached to the kind of pleasures of samsara, like our abode, our body, our possessions, the things that we think of as mine, and the kind of things that we take possession of. And so really we are like attached to things. It's really penetrated the way that like oil on cloth is really seeped in. We have this kind of clinging and attachment desire for those things. And so long as we have that kind of clinging, we are enchanted with our body, our possessions, the place that we live, we won't give rise to the wish to be free. So we need to examine how it is that holding on to these things, being attached to these various things, we give rise to various afflictions, our pride, our attachment, our jealousy, competitiveness, and so forth. And so in order to really want to be free from this, we have to give rise to an understanding of how it leads to our suffering, how when we give rise to those various afflictions, we then engage in negative karma, which in turn ripens in suffering. And so there are sort of different levels of wanting freedom from suffering. And this can be a kind of of freedom from the sufferings of the lower realms. Like, for example, we can see animals and the kind of sufferings that they endure. And so that wish to be free from that suffering, that's a level of renunciation, that of the being of small scope. But we need to sort of have a larger sense of that. Even like, say, a birth as a god involves suffering. And so there is that level of renunciation from all of samsara, that seeing, becoming sort of disenchanted with the abodes, our body, the possessions that we have within this. Now, normally we don't really pay attention, or we really are, we cling to these things. We have a kind of attachment to our various possessions, and we need to see how that kind of clinging gives rise to various afflictions, which in turn cause us to engage in negative karma, which in turn causes our sufferings. And so that attitude of wanting to get out, that kind of definite renunciation, is what the first attitude refers to.
Ina churche de cendile cheguyora, yudi cendile saguyora. Tisodiko cendile pengiwara soso dan namide changma. Chunashin chigine ko samlu tadonga je sam soso samli shidi tobgurwa, shiwa tobgurwa, sendale shidi leyora. Ina ko pendo de cendile yor. De ngarazu tambuda churche sidi cendile yaguyoya de chiyoya de kajali samlu tadira. Mati mandire churche chima penje samlu tang gewatuna. Sunam dana cendile yaga yongere kora. Cendi tondal yongna samda samgu maare chere. Sam tonda chunju chire dugare. Shinga tab suna. Tondo yagu chuna samgir matu semba yagu chuna samgu marwa. Samgu marwa ko semba yongde gra. Tondo hindu semba semjinte semba sina digra. Tondo yusa ki tsatu su sigara. O tinashi. Kyo chima penje samluta. 소수 지분 멤버십 자체부 삼을다니 최초고요라 배에데 센데레 팽고요라 소디 치메토다 삼을당고요라 데데 라줄의 당부들의 민중고고다 민중수도 찍을 먹고 삼자 자와지야지다 지디 고위에서 톱저치고도 먹어야 될 가르스 매수성 비껴와들이 나도 기부충을 샤샤나 당부 최삼을 당거나 교시만 영화를 맞이고 이달 맞이고 던돌을 맞이고 사담이 교와 상부치 톱고 삼자 매소숨을 깨네 동에 마무 연구를 삼 대소수 용의 삼을 당구라 소수 빼다바리 심미럽체 두스테에서도 용계 현다 이르서도 삼을 당기요 마라 소수 단다 미래 되어래 삼 코르사데 야와이다 또 강갈 코테요라 다른 밀레게 되어 삼 내만 된도다 기다다 강가께요래 심지어 또 교환디 말하세요 말이 야가디 교환하면 세요 말아 통면면에 어디 뉴카르소래 당가란지 기부 중국의 예반 중세의 가르스네 내송기 교환이라 녀이다 된도도를 현자한테 교환 말와 현자 매네 고텔리케나 디규디사나 텔리케나 네 칼렌도 삼티스 소그라 Titunda lamre tuzuyena, nyawa yida tendu tuzu tunge mabu shegra. Tatesa mezu tunge shida shegyo mari segra. Chiyedu tunge shida shen, tangbu tuzu ingire tunge shida shedana, da semba kiu mebe chagisam, kuchu meju el parje she nyanga yora. Ta che to zungone samlu konge shena, tesu samlu tangu yora. Gombulu du sadanga tendu daja nima re na susuya tendu tozol tasir tendu tele tasir temu tenga zu chensi karizone temu daga dura o desengi de o tiji desa susu tinan yoni tindi chiya yo samlo kor marwa o di samlo dangora ti tasogora tendu likene tunga kande do konzo kange kande do ti samta o rama o pal tindi chi chona ya ubendo samgirwa o tiene señal que na ani señal de yore se shegora chanye tungen de yore chanye de mina le yora chane segne medada ni singe mamudoga chanye se dirwa chanye se chagwa se chashi te ni singe doa 이다시 또는 저거 또는 사회면 통해면 신경만부도 와. 아니 지금 새또 그제 노안데 가지고 예소숨데 찬도와데 밀레 요셔라. 내가 가지고 심한데 여러 시지시라. 샘레 초아께 무용금도 쇼심용도. 뒤도 가서라. 땅부대. 람리 투즈나 시야나시. 던두다비실게 나서 달에 냐와데 이다 던두지다 시작 삼담마도나. 던두다비실게 베이나. 동네 컨텐도 티삼담도라. 라루라 시케비나 동네 컨텐도 삼다. 등에 전에 미기 배지 제베 세그마르 세그레 또 그래. 강가지지 가시나 빠빠고에서 가시르고 가시셔. 가실 지지 거집에 세 톱치라. 아니 코라졸레시 때무고시 동네 연기로 어떤데 누워서 라든들 동네 게 요래서 근데 걔는 얘가 누워 삼사 ten제 딜레 마지시데 네바도 제우도 삼사 ten고라 지버지 고요하지 질 겹세데 지버지를 겹줘고라 메송 동멜린 제시자네 겨시마 다 딜레 겹두고데 딜레 타로 제우도 가르치고 왔는데 다 산제 가르송도 겹던 법 산제를 겹쇼 겨시마 메송 동멜리 겹던로나 산제를 겹던 법 철에 겹수쇼서 산제 가르송도 최 미기와 주디 빵 교와 주디 두 송교하라 산제 송번에 철에 겹수쇼 산제 송번하시 예수님을 끼지 주디 영화 예수님 거네 미기와 주디를 해삼 기방구에 삼서 장구라 철에 겹수쇼 그 최등의 지금 삼구여라 철에 겹수쇼서도 최대 예수님 끼지 주디 미기와 주디를 샤삼 미기와 주디 빵기 인삼 된독소 교와 주디 두개 인삼 거라 철에 겹수쇼서도 소주바 빵리 소교바치기 인사라 마지발렘바스 셴기 잘라라 소바랄 원제 매바디 출랑주디 파샤네 랑기 셴달 파펜도 가 제토도 치기 인사라서 로임 생각이 지내 출루도 템바 사산도 이네 코티다마도 셴다 사산님도 참가 겹텐데 제가 마도 어디나시 진시에 파파네 템바셰기 인삼 참아제에 파파네 둠베치마기 인삼 참아치기 주예요라 기마셔셔 지지 몇든 버시는 수운동에 뒤에 계시 쉐고서 뒤kom 거라 식주부 쉐고는 식주부 쉐면 그뒤나 계전잠보지 쉐긴 인삼 돈다칼에 가보지 쉐기나 직잠보지 쉐고라 근데 삼다도 근데 소선 당가라 좀 해봐 주세요 담부 기부 총은 해봐 주세요 녀석이 동네에 해봐 주네 탈되네 텔레 탈베치도네 미기와주 교와주 진이 주바티레 어디지소나 야
So here, when we do Dharma, we are doing so with the thought of the future, of beyond just this life, at the very least, thinking about the kind of future life or liberation or the state of Buddhahood. So here, although the result that we are striving for is something in the future, our future life or beyond, the kind of causes that lead to that are things that we have to make effort at in this life. And so here, we don't have to separately think about sort of the benefit for this life, because that will come about by doing these kinds of activities. We will have good results. We will be sort of more peaceful and happy, but we don't actually have to think about that. It's sort of like if you're planting a crop, you don't have to think about the sort of like stalks of the plant. That's not your primary concern. You want that to be something that is good, but you're really thinking about the final result. And so there is a benefit that comes now in this very life to our practicing the Dharma. But here, this is really something that we are thinking about in terms of the future. And so here we have to have like a kind of, when we are striving for something, there is something that we are trying to avoid, and there is something that we are trying to get. We are trying to be free at the very lowest level. The being of small scope is trying to be free from the lower realms. And so we need to think about this in terms of our own experience. There's a lot of description within the stages of the path literature describing the sufferings of the hell realms and the hungry ghosts and animals and so forth. But we have to actually sort of like recognize those for ourselves. We have been born countless times as samsara is beginningless. We have taken births as the highest types of beings as well as the lowest. There's not sort of like a being that we have not taken rebirth as. And so at the beginning, there's no attachment to the sufferings of the lower realms. We are able to see that they are suffering kinds of situations. But this is something that we actually have to contemplate to a certain extent, not sort of see it as something like over there that's happening to others. We have to recognize that this could be our own suffering experience. So these days we see that there are some who kind of are unhappy at being told about suffering at the beginning. They get unhappy about that. They don't want to think about that. But once someone has begun to practice the Dharma a little bit, I think they can see the importance of thinking about suffering and actually contemplating that. So the master Nagarjuna has said that we should look at animals. We can see them all the time, the kind of sufferings that they go through, but we actually have to imagine ourselves experiencing that suffering, not sort of just like watching a movie. So likewise, if we were born into the hell realms or as hungry ghosts and so forth, we can see these kinds of sufferings even among human beings. For example, there are those that die of heat. There are those that die from cold or from starvation, from having injuries like being chopped into pieces. And so we should recognize that these are the sufferings that occur within samsara, and we actually have to sort of develop a kind of stable certainty of that, rather than just sort of like think about it in the abstract or think about it as someone else. Like, what would it be like if I were born as an animal, if I were born as a goat or a sheep, like where humans would use me? I mean, they would take everything that they can from me and then eventually kill me to use me for my meat and for my skin and so forth. That kind of suffering is what we would have to experience. We have to have a genuine kind of fear of those sufferings in order to avoid the causes. Like, so when we have an attitude of refuge, like we seek protection in something, it comes from a kind of fear. We want to avoid those sufferings of the lower realms. And so we look for something that can protect us. The Buddha is the teacher, the one who is able to teach us what we should adopt and avoid in order to get rid of our suffering. And the Dharma is the actual instructions, the practice of, for example, abandoning the 10 non-virtues. These are the causes of being born in the lower realm. And so we should think we are going to, at all costs, avoid those kinds of causes and instead do things to benefit others. So when we think about the kind of actions, like say taking life, the sort of harm that that brings to another, or stealing, when we take things that don't belong to us, either by force or other means, or kind of improper sexual relations that are discordant with the kind of ways of the world and cause strife and disharmony. We should think about the actions of our body, speech, and mind and recognize that those, being the causes of the lower realms, are things that we have to actually adopt in order to protect ourselves from that suffering. So abandoning the 10 non-virtues is something that we adopt as a practice, thinking I'm not going to do anything negative with my body, my speech, and my mind. I'm not going to say things that create disharmony and discord among people, things that cause strife and cause harm to others. I'm going to speak kindly and gently. Even if I have something that's very difficult to say to someone else, I'm going to say it in a kind way. And so with this kind of wish to be freed from the lower realms, we adopt as our protection the Dharma, which really at its essence for the being of small scope is abandoning the 10 non-virtues and engaging in positive virtuous actions as a way to protect yourself from that suffering.
Khi suy nghĩ như vậy thì trong lòng sợ hãi sẽ khởi lên. Khi sợ hãi khởi lên thì mình cầu cái sự cứu thoát, làm thế cầu cứu ai đó để cứu giúp mình trong lúc mình sợ hãi. Ai có khả năng cứu vớt ta trong lúc này? Chỉ có Đức Phật là đấng cứu hộ, có Pháp là bảo hộ cho chúng ta. Pháp là cái gì? Là cái phương pháp để giúp chúng ta thoát khỏi những khổ đau đó bằng cách là bỏ 10 ác đạo và thực hành 10 cái điều thiện, bỏ 10 cái điều bất thiện của những hành động qua những cái hành động của thân, những cái lời nói và cái ý tưởng. Nên thực hành pháp có nghĩa là chúng ta làm thế nào để ngăn chặn những cái nguyên nhân để sinh vào ác đạo, là để loại bỏ những nguyên nhân sinh vào ác đạo, là từ bỏ sát sinh, chúng ta không sát hại sinh vật mà còn phóng sinh, từ bỏ cái sự trộm cắp bằng cách là chúng ta phải bố thí, từ bỏ tà dâm, có nghĩa là chúng ta quan hệ bất chính với vợ chồng của người khác, để chúng ta phải tôn trọng những người khác, từ bỏ nói dối, chúng ta nói lời chân thật, từ bỏ nói lời chia rẽ thì chúng ta sẽ nói những cái lời để người khác hòa hợp lẫn nhau, từ bỏ những cái lời nói ác độc thì mình nói những cái lời tao nhã dễ nghe, dù những công việc rất là khó nói nhưng mình sẽ tìm những lời nói nào nhẹ nhàng nhất để giải bày và nói những lời dễ nghe để người kia chấp nhận. Nên mình phải thực hành bỏ cái 10 cái điều bất thiện, thực hành 10 điều thiện là những cái nguyên nhân để giúp cho mình giải thoát những khổ đau ở cõi thấp địa ngục ngạ quỷ súc sinh.
Oh yeah, that resource. Indi ngeban jungsa de nge susum la chera. Tatili ngeban jungne ne thare Thabkhe jurusna mikewa chude pa nyiri mecenala kewa chutube de doa. Sanjele kyaps cho se de sanjele atne nge song tungele thane hada mil ke tandal thabshi kar churese lavro na soro na sigora kyapte tero na sigora. Sanje masono kira lunga yusum jukone mikewa chude pa nyiri meza kewa chude troops. Ne kewa ngamane sa shabe mikewa chude len gyobache shakba chise. Atene te tabdi songda te chere doa. Chöle kyabcho sanje sumbane chöde nge chiwi sigora. Chöle kyabcho. Ne kendule kyabcho do te chöde trumgege roba yorwa. Ngarazu rejenda ngarazu chezo na ine de kindirwa. Pagbe kindu sigde pagbe kindu chira mato. Chö tubro chenge kami yada chisa. O te chö yabu chigdo chöba yabu do asam o te chegora. Kindu sine chogba del sigora. Nyamdo runge tele kindu chogba sigora. Tanda ma nesu tengen chik tembati tolan runge rosak chö chik langba chikora tele nyamdo runge ropa che o te sumdele kujo sum sigdoa. O te ngazo kibu chungu dige tangbu ngeba chungsa de nge susum che te tabdi miki chupa kewa chutuwe tere doa. Te ke chembure. Ngaranzo te ke chunju sigra kande nimju keji shedu ta luigi choba ta sembi samlu ta kare na ta shagira mata kile ke kanga nyega kanga tide yungora. Mila keji shedu chama chizu ngage shingure napsi yungure ne sembi samlu ta didroa. O te lunga yusum choba nyiri mi chizo na rudu tigba kanga yungora. So semgi mi mena so semgi milinga bache samlo kode ne tigba sa de yora. Ti ke chimbu chegure ti yigde maso tambu kaga kanga cheja shimande de ra. Shidi yigde yabo chlo mashini talya do me do holo so chide. Na ti ke chimbu re de yora. Ti de marazo tombalange de china ne chisi choy padunge mi ke wapangi ke wa chutukye se khela de yona ki mikiwa pang bata kewa chutube paye yungurwa. Kila mena nyiri samlutana ane yagu yore. Pangbe paye tugure. Pangbe samluche mena soji pangi insam chigme sam membache ko soji mabambache tebine so chebe tibade yungumaro mado paye yomarwa. Soji pangbe paye ke yomare. Chiduzu miseg marwa. Misi seba pangbe payage tong marko tibade yoye kego marmado. So semgiti o titi pangi yin sam yiringiri donga tiri ti chigme sam. O tiri chonsun o tiri maso asam. Tankarish kep susu semle susu tsipsha tangna ni nyuru gyora. Nime kadamba kishisu o tiri siware. Nima riri susu nal madib kari susu sam. Drepung tedi kuchilo dawas solatin de remuti gora. Dides ya tensane shubu de gando stesi ni somsi terisa. Tanga jedu tambu do ampede tabu nali atende remu kando sola remuk. Emptiness is our dedicated Chonsa, some to Buddhist in the day. And then you're saying Paruchil and Rimunabuchi, Trisadavi Mara, Nirina. Maranzu Shatangmara, Tas Karichona, some Karisam, some Yaga the Duka, Kanakation, Karishan, Shasam. Or Tendichimara. Pangi in some so check me, some sa. You may so much a Yabucho, some Satana. And it surely kept show said the Kibuchung children went to go. She kept in the real matter. I'm just a Karan there is a man this horse and a church shagora. Namji Pechane, Amjil Chan Sugdo. Me never see Koshi against Jipayana. Jibajukudo or Tanganazo to Tanyanga de Sam. Nesung to Melian Jishi and George Mutindikin and the Yanga do some Jibajora. That till tired and the Nazareth Amjisandura or Karan Nazar did DQ did study never so top did man did the saucer. The children. Tunging one and never saw the children. So check it. Teacher the man the and myself Shasha Tabarisha Sana and Pendoyoma Richard. And the man gave a country, but Bodhisattva Chungache, Naja Masen, and it not in a Pendoyoma Richard. Man the Sagura. What they did should they turn it in a singing in Besina to Sutili Changbaina. And the other session has a tribe and Nashi until Nedil Nagi Jibadile Soche and Jibale Taranashi, Nesong Jibal Tarangura. Or did you think you're in Becinal, some Dangura, Kibuchung Gasa? Ninjun still that on the Kibuchung Ninjuns. Then as Kibuchung with the ocean, Kibu drink the chamber to the Chile Mambuyangura. Teletona Chigmar. Keshu dele. Garadul Keshu. Did I get tired that ticket Chunjumare? Nigga Chupa, Kavachu said, Satom Nigga Pagbaja Tomba Musum to Tony Yandunet did your Jangure said. So Chuba piety, Nigga Chupaity, Sawapang Badra, shared to me the trend with some shoe church Tangara. So Jobias the Shell Pember drew some of the shoe church Togara. That Chamba and Sawani Redwa. Chamba and Sawani the Akone con the penny, and this Ram Wishanda, Dunga Tamja the Tower. They were taught to what watching is in the summer court together. What do you do? You did you study sooner?
So here, for the being of small scope, the place of renunciation, what they are wanting to definitely get out of is the sort of lower realms. And so here, this involves on a day-to-day basis, engaging in the practice of abandoning the 10 non-virtues. So we can't just sort of say, like, I go for refuge to the Buddha, I go for refuge to the Dharma, I go for refuge to the Sangha, but rather the way in which we go for refuge is by looking to the teacher, the Buddha, who gave this advice, saying that really the practice of the Dharma, what is able to be our protection or our refuge, is the practice of abandoning the 10 non-virtues and engaging in positive virtuous actions and trying to confess and purify those kinds of negativities that we have accumulated in past lives and this life as well. And so here, when we go for refuge to the Buddha as the teacher, the Dharma as the actual practice, and then going for refuge to the Sangha, even if we don't have sort of like an Arya or superior Sangha, those who have had a direct realization of emptiness, really this means sort of relying upon those who are likewise practicing. It is like our group of practitioners, those whom we look to be practicing as well as we are. So here, when it comes to the sort of source of refuge, it is the Buddha as the teacher. The Buddha teaches us what we need to then implement in order to be a source of protection. So here, the kind of renunciation of wanting to be freed from the sufferings of the lower realms and thereby engaging in the practice of abandoning the 10 non-virtues and engaging in virtue, this is really very important. We tend to see this as something sort of like small or something insignificant. But really, all of the essential points come in this practice of abandoning any kind of harm toward others. Because in our day-to-day life, this is when we have like non-virtues arise, whether they are of body, of speech, of like lying or harsh speech, whether they are the kind of attitudes of like covetousness or malice or wrong view, when we try to harm, when we have the thought to harm others or get angry, those are negativities. And so if we don't have this kind of basic practice, we can't jump to the other sort of higher things. It's like if we haven't learned the alphabet well, we haven't learned to read well, we can't expect to engage in higher studies. So here, this is very important that we also acknowledge it as like a vow. Some of us take vows for the course of our life. For example, some of us might take the vow for the course of a day, but just making that intention of saying like, I am not going to take life, that is the way in which we gain the benefit of those abandoning the 10 non-virtues. If we don't, say, over the course of a given day, happen to engage in killing, like we don't kill a human being, obviously we don't incur that non-virtue, but we don't gain the benefit that comes from making an active kind of pledge or vow. So this involves actually trying to take stock, sort of account for what has gone on in our mind. So the Kadampa masters of the past used to, like one who was living in a cave would make black marks on the wall, like with coal, for every negative action. And so at first, when he started this practice, it was like the wall is filled with negative, black marks. And by the end, by paying attention, by being aware of that, he's able to get rid of that completely. And so here we need to sort of evaluate our own mind, take stock or account of what has gone on in our mind. And so at the end of the day, if we are able to then recall, oh, I didn't engage in this activity, we can kind of rejoice in those good things that we have done. And so that's the refuge. That's what the real practice of taking refuge, like the example that is always given of the Buddha being like a physician who has given us this medicine, but we have to actually take the medicine in order to alleviate our suffering. Like if we're just getting all of this medicine from the doctor and stockpiling it, it's not helping us to actually get well from whatever illness we have. And so we too, with the Dharma, we can hear it, but we need to put it into practice on a day-to-day basis. We need to think about this practice of the being of small scope. Like if we don't pay attention to this, we can't get to the point of love and compassion, or like renunciation from samsara and then love and compassion and so forth. Even those bodhisattvas who have gained realizations and who are progressing toward Buddhahood engage in this practice, have this as a foundation. They are still abandoning the 10 non-virtues and engaging in virtuous actions. And so this is really the foundation for then being able to give rise to attitudes of love and compassion, that thought of wanting to achieve Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings and so forth. So we shouldn't be dismissive of this kind of practice of the being of small scope, the renunciation of that, as well as the kind of practice of refuge, which is really implementing the Dharma on a day-to-day basis, because this is the foundation for any practice that comes above it.
Cũng bắt đầu từ cái việc là từ bỏ cái điều bất thiện, rồi từ đó mới phát khởi cái lòng từ, lòng bi, từ bỏ tổn hại, làm lợi ích chúng sinh, cũng là cái nghĩa lý của là 10 điều thiện thôi. Cho nên cái pháp đó chúng ta cần phải thực hành mỗi ngày để dần dần cái tâm mình sẽ có tiến bộ, để gieo những cái nhân lành.
Dạ. Tôi đã được kìa ra. Đã từng đó Tông Bồ Tát Thị Đó ngã ra rồi à. Thế số rập của những vị thầy sẽ ngã ra rồi Tông Bồ Tát những vị thầy đó thì đó. Nghe xong cái cho là nghe bạn chú. Nên là thằng mi đó thông được chứ. Thì thab là chẳng cái mi cái chụp bằng cái chụp chụp về. Chơi thì chụp về rồi. Thì trong cái kinh điển hiện đại cái mi ở đó chứ hiện đại nhiều đó. Thì chứ. Thế nên cho nên chim đi học xong cái đó. Nông bà sang về chim đi học xong đó. Nên mi càng cái số số li cha xa. Rồi. Sự trung nhẹ chứ chim mà chơi chứ nhưng mà tự động sẽ vấn đề. Cái người nào dân bút tập chứ tập chỉ tiêu mà thôi. Mi càng cái thùng bùn cái đó. Số số mi càng cái chú cá bút chứ. Mi thì cha xa cái đó sang mẹ. 고고당 말에 계속 말을 차도 지만 돼서 무슨 미상부치기는 미강을 들 거기다 매일 통되어 봐 야부체 미상면 안에 거야 자샤스를 야부용 거라 뒤손자 가서라 기부 총회지 말아서 단다 줘야지 이거지 기분 중들래 코알에 탄데들다 하다 매일 깨나 동에 마부도 something 아고도 개베동에 나외 동에 내가 제대면 맨데버 터도 봐봐 로 tukbata trawa hidongwata trawa mendubata yongya tungi mambu yora tina shi hala tungi yora lama hila tungi yora chado tungi ta lato sule ya tambu shibu pusum sobu yora chima shigalama tungi mambu yonggu yora to dashi sari sabduza namchi pusum soba che shiye da tunde samlusi dati chiyo samlusi me shigalama shitade ya mendra she mambu tegdwa chide poche 어디 동행 거라 자 레다 녀모병게 소소를 장화 매버세 교아지 라나 교아라에 뒤도 녀에 된다로와 미드부시나 라이나 가리나 교아지 라야들 장화 매버세 치에지도 어디랴 고에 동행시 거라 코로아스든 로아리도 장화 매버세 찍네 끼치리 시도 스토데데로 코로아스 거라 고레죠 코르데요라 어디래 네반 정도가 뒤 동행삼 사다 미에 동에도 삼 텔레 야고메도 삼 동에 든데 요래 삼 바로지 티에 야고메도 삼 티에 저 통만 매바네 저 단다버도 동에 뇨데버레 삼 단다 마오바나 두스니라메도 동에 뇨제 데레 삼서 삼바이나 아니 소소군에 제 소소 뇨예레 삼 땅고라 소소 교나 마텐데 냠보라 마오바텐데 뇨그레 삼바이나 니 심리야 초아 쇼쇼불레그라 미现在电不当给说的现在给做要嘛的，说点的吃个的什么，说点的用个的什么，我让做呢，他这些呀热的我就com个吧，大家com个的，他都是com个的，说这叫啦，真的些com个的，都个说热的，搞不买啥com个嘛的，像我那地面了com个的。然后当初的见那肯定切塞的上，你说当初100万的，这见那东西的用塞的上吧，你什么错用个啦？说对不当个说的些，当初是到外的工作，当初些嘛，说没让些当个说的什么可能错是该用嘛吧？我听的说主要是做的接的，干嘛接呢？鸟一的当初爬下来的没，干嘛接呢？东西讲鸟过来的都上，他们没把那鸟的当的都是带的上。다들 타야 요나서 남바기 루리아 뭐 강가리 교요래 교단께 매버실이요 요 말해 티 교단께데 매버샤는 제부 매버샤그래 교단께데 요는 제부된 용기를 먹었으나 그럴래 용거라 근데 그 교단께 용기요서 다 고아께서 교가래서 요 텔레 타야 교가래 요래 말세 산제 속거라 고아데 통해라 시제래서 걔네 통해 법에 때뭐 tiene conjunto para tempo odi que diretas conjuntos nyamo gong sabe le ni butireta sungara nyamo sene da nga sabzane ngo chakta randa rajoli chakba shenda shenjol tamba kondo ta nga ge da chado da dresim da nyamo kang ga ja ko do o ti da ti wong ge ni le ke wasa me ke wasa na ko ko gare me ge le sa sun nge so sum ki gora 대왕의 계획에서 순환이 사단 메타트를 끼고라 하만 끼고라 어디인데 텔링 해본 정도라 기분 정기 값수 이번 정세를 가르스나 고외 동행ling 해본 중 도마매만에 고아고 로아를 줄래 단다 공개를 삼 사단 메가바께네 동행이랑 실제를 샤섬 텔레 타레시네 타고 그래 가리나서 타베주 가리나섬 산제 캡틴 바보 송구를 산제 좀 된데 강가 친구를 가르쳐 나섬 캡틴 바보 나를 산제 어디 내는 군주 바보 때버스 당신가 삼성가 라와지 나의 삼성 현자 신부체 내가 저 건조 시제 작당 공동하게 차도 됐음 소소의 미기비샤 녀모세 그런 민고라 소소 미기부 송게 동해와 챙겨서 녀모 버시에서세 깔 가부 송게 질리 녀모세가 민고라디 공동 아주 차도 대시제 소소의 기부게 요 말에 미션달에 그 미기비서 소소의 미기비체 단다 도스테도 소소소소 동해리 장게래도 와가지고 어디 누가 소래 딜레 타르마체고 삼사 Tele given drinking of some injunted koala. Koe dewa condition at telling about your temple matters and metal halikana. Jigbe chosen canarism, Nimbukaya medusams. Or tele tapachi could do some. And a calling given joint. Calling given joint, toilet tire tap carjuration, and then lam gomgura. Midabada, Tunga, the Tonga Tamela sopa. Tame bala sopa, or tip gomgura. Did give drinking, Ninjundra. Javasura could nucleus. Did give Chimbala and Juta Chibber. Give champion in Judea. Yasonga Tungaling Evanjo Samare, quite your Koran Evanjongara. Given drink that Kibu champion in Juchipara. Yeah, this one.
So that's sort of the, again, renunciation for the first stage is to have a sort of fear of the sufferings of the lower realm and want to attain a life as a human or a god. And so here, if we hold this kind of understanding, we will hold ethics well. We will, due to having that kind of ethical conduct, be able to be harmonious with others. You will be viewed well by others. When you act sort of properly or act well, you will be liked by others. You will sort of be in harmony with others. And so there are those kinds of benefits that accrue. But one who begins thinking about it recognizes that even if you are born as a sort of human or a god, you are still subject to the suffering nature of samsara. There are the sufferings of birth, aging, sickness, and death, the kind of sufferings of not getting what you want or meeting with the things that you don't want. There are sufferings even as like a demigod or a god. The demigods having this kind of jealousy, and the gods, even though they experience this life of having every excellent thing, when they get close to death, there are the various signs of death, and they experience a great deal of suffering with those kinds of signs of death and losing that sort of excellent status that they had had. And so here, to take birth again and again in this uncontrolled way, propelled by our karma and afflictions, is the sort of nature of samsara. We have had to experience this since beginningless time, and we will continue to experience this kind of suffering as long as we don't remove its causes. And so this is something where when we think about having been born in all of these various states within samsara, and again, this is defined as that cycle of sort of being propelled to take different births due to our karma and afflictions. This is something where we need to think about this in relation to ourselves as like something that we have experienced, that we have had to kind of take rebirth in those sorts of suffering situations. And so we need to develop a strong thought of this happening to us, not again like this is something that others experience or like we're watching a movie. And so here really a lot of us like to do meditation on self-generation as a deity or something, imagining ourselves as that kind of a being. But really the first most important kind of self-generation to do is imagining ourselves as beings in the lower realms, in order to give rise to this kind of renunciation, to recognize that we have been taking all of these births since beginningless time, and this is the kind of suffering nature of samsara. So that contemplation, I think, is more important than doing like a self-generation as a god. And when we begin to recognize this kind of cycle that we are in, we ask ourselves, well, is there an end to it? Is it possible to get out of this? Well, and according to Buddhists, everything arises from causes and conditions. So our suffering situation within samsara is something that arises due to particular causes. There is the origin of suffering. And so too, if we remove that suffering, there is cessation, taught as the noble truth of cessation, by engaging in the paths, the various causes that lead to that cessation. So here we can see that yes, there is a possibility of gaining freedom from overcome this cycle of suffering by removing the cause. It is this thought of I, this sense of grasping at an I, that leads us to give rise to all kinds of various afflictions, at anger and attachment and jealousy and competitiveness and so forth. And so when we have those kinds of attitudes, this thought of I, we engage in various actions. If they are non-virtuous actions, we take rebirth in the lower realms. If they are virtuous actions, we take rebirth as, say, a human or a god. But we have to experience suffering no matter where we are born. It is still within the nature of suffering. And so the Buddha taught this, the Four Noble Truths, that it is on the basis of this strong thought of I, this ignorance, the being the origin of then our suffering experience. And we too are able to get out of that if we practice the various paths, if we cultivate those paths that lead to cessation. And so here, the various karma and afflictions that are identified as the origin of our suffering, the very word affliction means to like afflict suffering, to cause trouble. It is what makes us miserable and others miserable. So we have to have this kind of view that nothing within samsara is stable or dependable, that all of it is within the nature of samsara. And this is the level of renunciation of a being of middling capacity. It compels one to then meditate on the various paths, to develop an understanding of impermanence and suffering, selflessness and emptiness, in order to then achieve that cessation, that freedom from suffering. And so that level of renunciation is that of the being of middling capacity, but it is also applicable. It's the same kind of renunciation that is generated by a practitioner of the great scope as well. They need to come to see all of samsara as like not having any essence, not being something that is stable or dependable, in order to want to be freed from that.
Những cái hiện tượng sự vật nó tồn tại trong sinh tử luân hồi đều là cái pháp hội diệt. Nó có đó rồi nó sẽ trở thành không. Nó không có cái nghĩa lý gì cả. Những cái sự vinh hoa trong sinh tử luân hồi. Nên chúng ta suy nghĩ như vậy để nhàm chán những cái cảnh giới mà mình đang có, và cầu nhàm chán những cảnh giới thấp, những khổ đau của ác đạo, để cầu thoát ly những ác đạo. Nhưng nhàm chán không những là nhàm chán những khổ đau trong cõi thấp, mà những cái hạng bậc trung là những cầu giải thoát cũng phải thiền quán và vô ngã để nhàm chán những khổ đau ở những cảnh giới cao vẫn còn sinh tử luân hồi. Và những cái hàng bậc thượng cầu giải thoát để vì lợi ích cho tất cả chúng sinh, cũng không những là nhàm chán những khổ đau của địa ngục ngạ quỷ súc sinh, mà các ngài còn nhàm chán những khổ đau của cảnh giới cao, và nhàm chán luôn cả những cái quả vị niết bàn cho riêng bản thân mình.
Nói là ta điều gì đó, ta chúng ta khó sâu ra, khó là nghiên cứu xong rồi ta đi, tension như cái chuyện là lo mấy bao, ngã ra rồi ta đem bị lụt vào rồi na, những rừng bút tay cái ở mà rồi, phụ sung sắp cái rồi na, tension như cái rồi na giao ban chỉ cái rồi, sẽ thì là long những rừng bút tay cái ở mà rồi, cái đó xong rồi ta bên đó chân đi là sinh ra thì chôn rồi, chân đi càng càng xong rồi ta sinh ra sụp chân bút tay chôn rồi đó. Nên rồi mình lúc khóe tung cái nằm xí đó, cái vào thằng mày bạn này sẽ mình lấy cái này hay cái này tung cái mà bao nhiêu đây ở đây xong, nên rồi mình lúc khóe tung cái nằm nhà xong nè, nhà ở đây ta chọn được cái gì mình làm mấy cái cái này, nhưng bữa cái mình đâu xong, cái đó cũng bị khóe phun cho là im cái gì xong, khóe phun xong sau đó cái gì này khóe im mà sinh ra mà vào ta chỉ bị chơi gì xong, nhưng bữa cái mình xong, rồi 지금 주제 장자를 삼네. 어떤데 삼을담을 인주시거라. 대다 공부 코에 편조라 이미 끝이 잠이지. 코에 부순서가 컨디션에 사용 뭐 자신 좀 시키나 가이냐고 맨날 처음에 방가라 줄게요래. 야고마 딜레서서도 양신다지 코데요라. 잠불린 개부럽던데 제 콜레지에 개보세. 잠불린 왕종게 텐데 개부이나 니무게요 말 타바리스테게요 말 양고 신다 동행용 되거라. 거에 배송서부터 땐도 대화게 말와. 내금지 대화를 말도 양고 지동에 자르와. 그 땐도 동행에 타로시거라. 대다 공부 거에 분조를 이미 끝이 사람이지. 인생권도 타로왔던 일로 존에 되지 민주교 어다 코알에 타로시 원에 제고에도 왔음. tarbe kyuan do sam, tanda ne begu do sam, ane kondo dang, aje dang, chado dang, jesem dang, nga samsang so ngan zindi, nga samsang nga tenja mado, jirwa soso tike cheshura shiv tseche, samluko rwa ngan zindi ba, tome mari bada ngan zindi ba, nga samsang pe, shukchen puche nga se rawa do shuchi yoba samgido wa, tende ke yo marwa, kashe se chobal pa, teni pa, tasha chi mado, ngune shibuji yone tseni nye rish kuhura timidwa, sobude chashe ka tirbe, simbi chashe duwe, simjung kondu maje chado duwa duwe, tezu kanga nga yinba shinde tsegan rona nye ke yo mare, tak sueba, che sueba sigira, tak je chene ko raya yoba, cheba chene raya yoba de chene ko tak sueba, che sueba, rangwene yone tindish korwa, rangwene yone, pi shendala teni pumbungala teni takwa, zamlani pumbunga lega chidu tak laga chawase, te tidu nyongewa tinde chi yuwa teni takwa zamki, taka chi yuwa mato rangwa tinde yuwa mare samna, pengirwa. Nga se te shibuchik rangwa chi me sam, pumbungala teni takwa zamri sam, pumbunga lega chidu tak lega chi, dewa nyo tunga nyo tinde chi samna, shenja chung ruwa, o ti indu kasur. O den dire tanda, minjung se tire doa, kaya soran kun Emptiness. O di shunani diba shendwa, ya.
So here again, this line that says the essential points of all the scriptures of the conquerors refers to this kind of renunciation. So here, to really have genuine renunciation, first we have to, again, turn away from the kind of attachments to this life. So it says later in this text, the 3 principles of the path, that by cultivating the mind that this human life is so hard to find, yet has no time to spare, preoccupations with this life will cease. So here, when we recognize that this life of freedom that we have right now is not easily obtained, and it's something that is easily lost, it doesn't remain for long, this reduces our attachment to the kind of affairs, the excellencies of this life. And thinking too about the kind of truth of karma and samsaric sufferings, preoccupations with the next life will come to cease. So here, when we look at the various kinds of sufferings of like hell beings, hungry ghosts, animals, and so forth, and again, contemplating that we have taken countless rebirths, we have whatever kind of birth that we have attained, even when we have been born as, say, a wheel-turning monarch, having dominion over the entire world, that is something that doesn't remain. The excellent things of samsara don't have any essence. They don't have any sort of permanence or stability that we can hold on to. And so we need to have that kind of thought, that recognition, in order to strive for liberation. And so here it is the basis of our suffering within samsara is this thought of I. We first have this thought of I, and then we hold that I to be incredibly important, to be sort of cherished, something that we value, and we also see as being like autonomous or independent. If it actually existed in the way that it appears to us, it would have to be something that would be findable. Like it seems like something we would have to find something within like the parts of our body or our various minds, like whether virtuous or non-virtuous anger or jealousy or whatever. There should be something that we should point to, we should be able to point to, that is findable, that can like bear analysis. If this I has the kind of objective existence that it seems to, then there's something that we have to be able to point to. But rather this I or this self is something that is merely dependently designated, that is merely designated on a particular basis of designation, but can't be found with any kind of logical analysis. And so we think so strongly, we have this strong sense of I, and then we grasp at the kind of various excellencies of samsara, but renunciation is the wish to be freed from those.
교수로님들 계세 담번은 병학벌 남신 입어들어 계세 담번은 병학벌 남신 계세 전주선 벌선 거라 병학벌 남들 거래서 전주 그셈대로 먼저 남균의 전주선 시에가 전받아 저었으니 교대 명한 되시 딱생냠지시 어디를 거라 계세 전주선 받는게 막버 집에 남들 답이 신집에 전주선 로장장장 장에 버루질린 소소다 신제는 신게 쇼증게 대신 탐제 개발해봐 나주 미리 나주 지지 남미스 텐데면 강가 개발해봐 제통게 차겨라 이 전주 셈들다 계세 담번한 병학바 막준세 그 남디카르스네 답이 신집에 전주셈 잠바다 닝지를 시제로 잠바다 닝지 자와송 이때를 때는 신동에 탐제다 자와 자고 요섬 대화 탐제던 데뭐 자고 요섬 대체도 랑게 산계지 고반 톱고 깔래 겹치 랑경 군세 연대 군대시 산계지 고반 톱아치는 참말이야 펜토 통계 네가 용수 쪽배권에 동해대 저와 제통백의 강사시 지빙인 삼 어딜리 전주 셈세도 계세 담보 남빙가 볼람데 다음에 신체거든 말아준 남빙가 보셔야 돼 수수디 계시 주세요라 신뢰랑 계시와치는 미디 전부를 날 정부 인삼기라 전주 셈버서 수수된다 잔잔 좀 할레비오 마라 랑레 신께 저제 신 조선 비나 랑게 된다 야셔들에 되어라 랑산게 고반 토비다 타두게 기분 조례게 토비 야셔들에 되어라 딜리 장구여라 따정다 오 사르신 소스지부 삼르티 마뇨리뇨데 셴뱅 삼르티 캬처르 쳬르다 니 바루지 셴뱅 삼르티 랑게 된다 임버레 전주 셈바게 랑게 된다 신다가마 셴레 펜버트에 총송했더니 그 들은 뒤송에 고쳐서 삼사텐데 공부하다. 어딘지 계세 담번 남녀가 벌함스도 전주sem을 세례했음. 민주연나 전주sem에는 산지 고만 톡톡 말와. 인도 민주 장장만이 봐. 라지부 고에 동엘에 타와만이 봐. 심지 탐제 고에 동엘에 타와 제고리. 대체도 텐데 제통경기. 네가 용수 속에 교육에서 연대 군대인지 강사진 유로 자고요섬. 어떤데 샘들을 자주 샘세도 계세 담번 남녀가 매람 자주 샘세 어디 싫어해요?
câu thứ hai là
So here then that wish to be freed from the sufferings of the lower realm and the sufferings of samsara, that's the attitude of renunciation expressed in this first line of the essential points of all the scriptures of the conquerors. And the next line, which explains the path acclaimed by all excellent bodhisattvas, this is referring to this attitude of bodhicitta, the attitude of bodhicitta that is developed through the foundation of love and compassion, through the sixfold cause and effect method, through equalizing and exchanging self and others. So here we normally have a kind of self-cherishing attitude wherein we see ourselves as more important than others. But by exchanging those attitudes, eventually we can come to value others more than ourselves and really work for the benefit of others without any kind of partiality, discriminating between some that we like and don't like and so forth, but rather by developing these attitudes of love and compassion, affectionate loving kindness, we can generate this wish to free all sentient beings from suffering, the want for them to have all happiness, and thereby the desire to attain this state of Buddhahood wherein one has developed all good qualities and removed all faults, and you're able to benefit all other sentient beings most fully. So here we normally, again, hold ourselves as most important and don't value others as much. But through developing this kind of attitude, through exchanging self and other and developing our love and compassion toward others, developing this kind of kind heart, we can actually get to the point where the aims of others, the benefit of others, is our own benefit, where we think like when we have been able to work for others, that we have fulfilled our aims, that suffices. sort of. So here, this recognition that all sentient beings like you need to be freed from the sufferings of cyclic existence, and it is by attaining the state of Buddhahood, a state in which you have removed all faults and developed all good qualities, that you are most able to affect a benefit for others. This is the sort of attitude of bodhicitta, and this is indispensable for getting to Buddhahood. So as it says later in this text, that such renunciation too, if not sustained, will by pure awakening mind, will not become a cause of the perfect bliss of unexcelled enlightenment. So if we are lacking bodhicitta, there's no way to attain this state of Buddhahood. So here, this second line referring to the path acclaimed by all excellent bodhisattvas is bodhicitta.
Oh, tifa meba soya taliani tongba ni toku yora. Tongme maripa de karasam gursta nga rawa dochi. Tiba samgi yora. Nga rangi yo samsare sambuto. Ngone chene nga di mambu ju chone ni pa tele mingji tane. Ni nga se shao yora mado. Nga rangi yo se ju chu yo eke midwa. Yene tendeji ya sambuto. Nga rangwe ne tuba. Rawa do tuba. Rangshi di tuba. Oh. 근데 말은 주마 망보지 처는 수주고요라. 초 망보지 처를 뜻인 되네니 나 샤워로마도 나 디레스 찍 랑게 통게 코랑코라 축 통게 코랑코라 여 통게 질로가 시게면도 정어디 동반이 또 하나 코와 고지기 교육 자와디 다든지 바테레도 나 삼다 라와 주반지바 나데 베라와도지 째네니요 가바였으네 너바지리여서 미드스 캐리 캡트 tinderes지도 가시 나이서지 배워있네 방골이야지 나이인다세 간다바지 방골 대사 가시 너지 레가도 같이도 만도바지르스듯이 너바있네 너바 방골 좀 나이인데서 그래 얘게 말 거기나 난제도스 요르마도 나게 요 말하지 근데 삼리도 하다 어디 근데 탄도 남기 중원에 동엘에 땐도 타로도 계시나 동해 자와 당지 통매 마릭 받으래 통매 마릭 받게 삼반나시 매바 공고여라 다 매바스 통매 마릭 받에 다 라와 여바 삼겨라 소소데 라와지 여바 삼겨라 아니 나이스 라와 여바 삼겨라 다 동반이 더블로데 나스게 결혼 삼반나시 라와데 요 마르다세 나이스게 나요 라와시 요 마르다세 때네 따바삼 차시 망보질 때네 바 명다바나시 로 어디서는 그 근데 단도 남진 중어대에서 카르마 토발이야 코에 짜오데 방고 코에 짜오 방고라야 담에 또 그래서 어디 근데 타르와 동일에 땐도 타르와 내가 남지 중어대 주고사 냠슬랑고사 저어데 양답에 따와드려서 민중정세 양답에 따와서도 뒤에서 거라 뒤에서 나라주고 뒤숨들을 매 장기 인삼 거라 민중으로 내성기 동엘에 타르바다 고에 동엘에 타르발라 소바 기부총무단 증다 쳔빌람리아 림길로 장네 타르토베 산제지 고반시 토버자기 인삼 타체고라 등에 용고 말에 삼사 데스타 시에셔마다 영야 말에 삼사 삼지 말에 이름 무삼 나오라 교환디 장제 말에 교와시마 대시마 교만볼 칼레점나 가제 고나시거라 chanju semdelia kaje gona keba kar gogina ingor sigdo chanju sem samkon semdi majibola tab mesam sanje ko wa to semdi ke kaje gona gosen gor ke sigi omare ning gona ke chuye ke omarwa shenji te tubeta lam kone kondo peya kawa kone kondo peya tende re ma do shenji kale kem ngaduna shi tande kale khana chore tende yo mare chanju sembal lebu kale khande shenji tando kale khande chuna ko kabe thone cheto gora sa lam tewane tewan ro re ma do tungeji nyane ni tunge nyane tewan ro ko mare na besene lam tewane tewan ro ase Chirubayani yachi, menga tembala soba, tiba chaya tandal, Mabu yora, choshil mepar sera, sobu kali capture, Dungzeli chomba sera, Kali Mabu capse, sobu the mavison, Tarwa to Grisser, Tinde Mabu Shedawa, oh, Tinde number Sanjati Maris. Nam deva ne devu deva to yare. So samlu de ba kya kya yarwa. Sibju ning du cheru cheru taya, shiro cheru cheru taya. O dilia tene ya nam kong ne kong de dhogo yara. Mure tunghe ji nyang je ne, di che go ya kya kya mare se ora. Lam gu che do kale de kya gurwa. Ina nga tanda nga zu kale so go yorde. Ya samlu tang tang du kale so go mare. Kale di deva le so re. Marazu Rova Kasha Mission that in the robot achieve catching winner, Susukale Kana, Yabuchon Samgidwa, Kurto Gudwa, Soto, Kale, the Kale Mungi Medwa, the origin of the Atiringa Korpen, the Yabuchon Samgidwa, a Chanju symbol tender. Champagne Shaji Samtangatella, Shangi turned to the Chonsona Kale Sogamar, Kale Sona, and the Kavamambo Kale and the Kakuna, Kale Kabura Samgira. Oh, teachers it out and Ninju Chansi Yanda Betawas Sumbuti Resha some Maragi Sendel Tobache, Sambache, Pacha Shayane and Sede, never to Tendis Tobache, Toba show some Sanjay Koma Toba show some Tobache some. Teacher do ne Sanjay Koma Toji shooting Yangi some Gunu Satan Sangura. Gunu the Jachambu Samutana Pay Jachambu Yungure. Cosingatu Rosa, Pombanitan and Pay Shibichi. Don't you don't change, then you come Kanga, which you not do Kane. She said, so about the Sanjil Pulaja, and the Tombani temperature, Rankin Zimba Turba, Shana, Shabbat, the pen shares on the door. The guys in the courts all Korande. To me, you said it's all Korana, or Tindico, Tension by Yugora. Lonju Mambo Pia de Cosona Mambosa Soso, then you presum so by your air. Lonju presum so by your Mahobana, Tende Julia Lugar mother. Kurang mo chane tarwa toba tongbanyi na she tende ne bachimbu yongo mardo o tesum de tende kunu se dam ne sembar shius tende bache no ya this.
So then it says in the final line of this, or the third line, the gateway for the fortunate ones aspiring for liberation. So this is what is going to be explained here. So it is then emptiness, the wisdom realizing emptiness, or this correct view that is the doorway, the gateway for the fortunate ones aspiring for freedom. So if we want to have freedom from samsara, we need to identify the root. What is the cause that leads to the sufferings of samsara? So it's the root cause is this grasping at an I. We have this sense of like an I that exists in and of itself, that exists objectively, like substantially from its own side, inherently somehow. But rather, it doesn't exist like that. The I is something that is designated on the coming together, the aggregation of a number of causes and conditions. So there is no sort of objectively existent, intrinsically existent I, but it is the sort of case that we really hold to there being a real, true I there. We see that people really get into sort of fights over this. We do all kinds of crazy things out of this sense of like this I as being really existent. And so if we want to have freedom, sort of this real freedom from samsara, we have to recognize the kind of reason that we are experiencing this suffering. And it is this beginningless ignorance when we think that there is a real sort of autonomous, independent I, that there is some kind of like a mine and so forth. We engage in all kinds of negativities. But when we recognize that this is something that is merely dependently designated, in order to abandon the resultant suffering, we have to get rid of that fundamental cause. So we should think that we are going to, in stages, train our mind in the attitude of renunciation, of wanting to be freed from this, as well as the attitude of bodhicitta and this kind of correct view. We're going to try to develop the kind of understandings of those in order to eventually reach the state of Buddhahood. So we need to have a kind of decisive, conclusive sort of attitude attitude, that we are going to strive for that state of total enlightenment, that state of Buddhahood, however long it might take. Like when it comes to us, we're sort of in a hurry to get to Buddhahood, whereas for actual bodhisattvas, their path is one that goes from joy to joy. They are joyfully engaged in activities to benefit others, and they don't therefore experience sufferings. It's not like, say, we have to engage in some kind of like crazy austerities or pains in order to be able to achieve Buddhahood. Like, for example, we see in some traditions engaging in austerities, like going through these 5 fires or sort of torturing the body in order to purify negativities and so forth. It's not like that. We do, of course, need to sort of be able to have the kind of mental fortitude, this sort of long-term thinking that says this goal, however far away it may be, I'm going to strive toward that. And so we increase over time our understanding. And obviously we do have to make an effort. There is some kind of effort involved, but it is the kind of effort where when we have this bodhicitta attitude, we bear with the things that seem like suffering. A bodhisattva is really able to view whatever comes at them in a joyful way. They don't view it as suffering, even if they have to go through it for eons. It's not something like where they think, oh, how long I'm going to have to go through this. So here we should see in this way that we are going to progress toward that goal by hearing the teachings, reflecting on them, laying down imprints and meditating on them as much as we are able to. And we should have this kind of like vast intention. And when we have such a vast intention, the results are vast as well. As explained in the Vajrakutta Sutra, this attitude of emptiness is incredibly powerful in terms of generating merit. So if one were to imagine someone making offerings of the world systems filled with the 7 precious jewels and so forth, the 7 royal emblems and so forth, that kind of great offering cannot compare to the sort of merit that is generated by engaging with the teachings on emptiness, like even memorizing one verse or hearing or thinking about these things. So we should see that this view of emptiness is incredibly powerful, and we should take the kind of, we should set our intention with the sort of long-term vast aspiration, thinking that we are going to engage with these teachings, like this teaching on the 9th chapter of Shantideva, with the objective of eventually gaining Buddhahood. Again, not seeing this as something like that's a difficult trudge, but like something that we engage in joyfully, going from joy to joy.
Tại vì tính không nó có khả năng thoát khỏi sinh tử luân hồi, nó loại trừ toàn bộ những khổ đau cho chúng sinh. Cho nên cái công đức của tính không, nghe tính không và chứng đắc tính không nó nhiều hơn vô số lần những vị mà chỉ bố thí cúng dường, giống như bố thí 7 báu, vàng bạc châu báu, lưu ly sa cừ mã não, các loại báu ở nhân gian đem cúng dường, thì là chỉ cái nguyên nhân đem tới sự giàu có vinh hoa phú quý, mà nó không phải là nguyên nhân đoạn trừ gốc khổ đau. Cho nên khi chúng ta phát khởi cái động cơ lớn lao để nghe lợi ích chúng sinh, để làm lợi ích lớn, tại vì lợi ích cho tất cả chúng sinh, cho nên con phải nghe cái bài học về tính không để trí tuệ, cho nên công đức sẽ được vô lượng.
당은 저 데레서 도 저데 견신 따단 덴바네 세더라 견신 따단 덴바네 그러니까 통치를 랑이 랑세 나세도 레셈자버가서요라 견신에서 되는 아주 신심시베 뭐시지 신지 심시에 뭐시 주요요라 신의 톱으로 담부 신의 톱 셈제지도 저 동백 신의 톱 톱산에 소수 류긴 남주다 텐데테네 삼루 텐데 코위에삼 샹기 류긴 남주를 텐데 그 삼루 텐데 코위에삼 자네 텐데 장시되는 빠루질 소수 삼이한테 퍼져 셈도 따다 튕겨요래 그런 텐데 삼부도 삼시 따다 그때 삼비에서 삼나 셈비 개발 강거 신토고라 어디서 와라 겐신 따다 담바네서 남내 예를 제버서 그래 남내 예를 줘 신세시베 무엇이 주에게 탑시죠라 때 예를 제벌 때 내서라 겐신 남내 신세시베 namne yile chebe kenshen dala tenne sora kenshen tata demba ne sora ni tong chere se shenji sem tongu dwa sora shenji sem tongu ne soso sem gi meton akande de tongu dwa sora sem jamba rari chugu ora rang sheba kande chi kene sheba tenyam do koran ribe chachi nyam do yore se gi dwa keslai banga jo ore bchena ra shen se war sheba chachi da koran se chachi nyam do yora shen se war sheba de koran ra koran se war sheba de koran chachi yore de de se loga los me do ha sa sheba kande chi kene tenyam do yu shen se chachi da koran ribe chachi ni nyam do ke yore se wara ke nani chema chiso ne de tongson sam yu de tongson sam yu de tong tengire tong de tengire se tong de sheba de tengi wara se tong koran tong ge sheba chemena tengi mare se tal do so ta uma ba chena o ti chida tembala nyo ko de yu de tembala yu de nyo ngon de do mare yu shenda de samlutane chani ke de nyam de shenda chen do keslap so nganzo chiwe so kyamne kunga so kyap so sam te tu shu bo tu yena chema ko dru ta chu du de ya mat baryo do ta tu re sha sam ha ko gara te tu shu sha sam te tu shu bo de nyo ngo do so yo mar de chen to gu do wa se gora sa chidan ko yu de nyo ngo do so ne temba yore de nebar do yu de chena yu de nyo ngo do ro ko be neba yo ma re se ora sem zam ba chine o ti yo re ti so da sheba de rang ra sheba de shen ji yu sem je to do as ta ren bu so so ta ni se chi de yu ge de rang sheba de rang re ku ro as go ra pena ta ni bu yu be jala chung chung ji kap de chi to na ta ren bu yu be ne ka so da 다른 불기에 충주 동군이 다 예우 여기 전부도 동구로 와서 다른 미셈 동도고래 수수셈 대수수 동매도 간데 동구래서 거라 어디래 겐신 다단 대반에서도 겐신 가르스 아니 현지 셈셰베 가서래 남내 일을 집어서 그래 남내 일을 집어 수수셈이 류긴데 남준데 텐데 셈기 캐반데 연구 샬라데 연구 어레 셈 꼼차가래 어딜 남네 일이 세워서라 겐신다단 대반에 통치르스 샹기셈 통구도 와세 랑이 랑세나세 샹기셈 통구네 소소셈게 소소셈 통구로 와세 랑게셈디 랑이 기세로 통구로 해서거래 통구바 예노세 셈잠바게 데버데 수시에도 와 나들 파가고 세거래 엄마바게 어디 고마르세 타니세도 돈에 다른 부디 돈에 타니세도 돈에가 요 마르세거라 주베 민매 조로할래 봄도 민매 니 민주르세더라 그냥 공가 겸니치 밀리아 가 겸네 에네 딜리아 매를 서셔들 푸겸네 밀이 주나 ane sawo ge tere so tonto be chera sawo le pesha gero semi pesha bra yena da ya sawo tere da bra buchit de na ti tonto re chera ko mi de me chuni ke de sawo ge tere la so bo tonto ge de kora mil chu shabe ti me de tonto me do chera sa ta nye na ton nge ba ke yo ma de se bunda tine shi re se ti nye ba yo ma de se ti len ja gore kanshira chube mingme choro alesiga nga kyamne chuneni milya me mingme se di cho sona sigora chorne ane kare tongo se pomdon se sawoge pombala sobatinde na rubuchi pesane tezu tongure ter shindami da yune tezu tongure ra pomdon se mingme ni mezo mil jusha mende kura mil tili yorde de tongo me doa sera tili yune tonga ngebachi da dan to rubu tonga 타니 보통 내가 요 말에서 근데 계란도 줍질 누구면 넣으세요 와라 어디 주나
So here, then picking up in the text with verse 24, here we begin with the kind of view of the mind-only school. So it says, in different circumstances or sort of in different conditions, the minds of others are seen. So the mind must also illuminate itself. So here there is a kind of like clairvoyance, the ability to see what others are thinking, that is developed through someone develops like serenity or calm abiding meditation. And on the basis of that, they are able to, by paying attention to sort of like the external kind of expressions and so forth, through the power of their meditation, they can get to the point where they know what others are thinking. They are able to see the minds of others. So again, to back up and just give the context, this is again in the context of the mind-only school as asserting that there is a reflexive awareness or self-cognizing cognition, a sort of part that illuminates external objects as well as illuminates itself. So here, there's a part that takes that external object, but they would then say that the thing right there, the thing nearby, the subject is also realized. So here, part of their reasoning behind asserting a reflexive awareness is for memory. They would say that in order to be able to recall not just like the seen object, but the fact that you saw it, the experience of seeing it, we have to have a prior experience of that. Now, in general, Madhyamakas would agree that yes, memory is preceded by experience, but an experience of the object is sufficient to be able to elicit and experience a subjective experience just through the kind of connection with that. So here, like for example, it says when a rat say recollection is due to the connection of the perception of something else. This is like the poison of a rat's bite. So for example, if we're bitten in the winter, it uses this kind of example of where you're bitten in the winter by some kind of a rat, and we have an experience of that bite, but we don't have an actual direct experience of that poison entering in. But yet we are able to, when we later experience that poison, think, oh, this was from that rat bite. And so this is one way in which they assert that there is a reflexive awareness. But then here in this verse, they're really getting at, well, if you can see, for example, through developing meditative techniques, the minds of others, then of course, why can't you see your own mind, which is right there? So it would make sense if the mind has the ability to illuminate things far away, it should be able to illuminate that thing that's right in front of you. So here they give this example, a centrist or the Madhyamaka responds saying that a pot is seen due to the application of an empowered eye ointment, but the ointment itself would not be seen. So for example, like when you have some kind of magical eye ointment that is maybe blessed through mantras and so forth, when you have put that eye ointment on, perhaps it gives you the ability to see some sort of buried treasure, like some sort of pot that is buried underground. But although this kind of magical ointment gives the ability to see things that are small and far away or might be obscured by something else, you don't see the ointment itself. So the mind-only school is trying to say that, well, if a mind can illuminate things far away, it must illuminate itself, the thing that's right there. The Madhyamaka would respond that that doesn't necessarily apply. We can have situations where you can see the thing that is far away, but you aren't able to see what is right there. And so this does not prove the existence of a reflexive awareness.
Making Musum the Suchi Tonson and Geshe-ma, Maha Sudi Musum the Tonson Yamdo, Tambake Yumarese. Otenation, Miji Geshe no Kungal, and the Geshe Tursonse, or this Ranga Teba de Sosu Shiba Manuna, the Tanta Umaresora. 다나시 소리 Geshe-ma 삼루타는 게만 대신게 매대다 다다 교생 삼루타는 게 대시소세 근데 템바케 용 말이 통하다 퇴바다 셰발라 소바트 좀 매버차 그래서 그래서 참에 조금만 도와서 동계 셰바 매버차 도와서 그래 심장부가 출라라 너버티쳐라 다들 발레 잡는데 제대로 통도 셰바다세 내 통수 무슨도 통하다 셴레 퇴바다 소수 삼루탄의 셰바트 조세가라 제대로 통도 셰바다세 니네 각바를 잡면 되세 우마버티 가게 요 말에서 거라 통하다 퇴바다 되죠 가게 요 말에서 요 말에서 되죠 요 레스 되죠 요나 요목에 끼게 말에서 다좀부터 속에 현지 수 통그레 소수 다 퇴그레 소수 시기 요래 되죠 요래 되 요목에 말에서 거라 안에 가래서는 통하다 퇴바다 통자다 통제다 되죠 강가 템버를 또봐 랑원에 여봐 근데 지금부터 코에 짜와를 해서 디가고 요래서 유랑원에 줘봐 유 통제랑실 랑원에 줘봐 통제랑원에 줘봐 퇴자자 통계 나외 시발을 써봐 디랑원에 줘봐 디가고 그래서 디랑원에 줘봐 지금부터 코에 짜와치 요래서 기순자 디가고를 마도 지다 통하다 퇴바다 되죠 강가 가고 말해 통화 터버 뒤집으고 뭐 계획 해봐요 말해 자전부터 저기 소통그래 자퇴그래 돼 녀모 계획에 놓아서 그래 빨리 해줘라 어디서 돈안 되라 야
So here, then to read this next verse, as the mind-only school asserts, there is a part of our cognition, our consciousness that sees the object, and then there is the part that is subjective, that is observing the subject. And they would say that if we don't have that kind of reflexive awareness, we wouldn't be able to recall that subjective experience. We wouldn't be able to think like, oh, I saw that person or I talked to them. We wouldn't have the ability to remember that. Or if we had thought through various reasons and syllogisms and so forth, we wouldn't have the ability to recall those kinds of mental objects that we had taken if we didn't have that kind of reflexive awareness, that valid cognition of consciousness. So this is what they are saying, that those things, if there is no reflexive awareness, then those are not validly existent. Those become non-existent. And so here the response to that from the Madhyamakas is in verse 25. Here, that which is seen, heard, and cognized is not refuted. Rather, the conception of them as truly existent, which is the cause of suffering, here is to be prevented. So here, when it comes to these various things, like the various forms that we see and sounds that we hear and so forth, those exist. We're not denying the kind of existence of those, but rather it's the kind of existence from their own side, that objective existence, which acts as the basis for the various afflictions, which in turn are the cause of suffering that is to be refuted. Because arhats, even those who have
let's do
so the time is up for today.
let's do the dedication and Bodhisattva prayers. Gewadi nu da lama sange june Drowa chikang malipa de sala goba Jung Rinpoche Makevana Kejuche Kewanamba Mebaya Gone Gondo Ewansho Nguyên Nam Gong Đơ Cơ Này hướng về khắp tất cả đệ tử và chúng sinh đều trở thành Phật đạo. Thank you, Rinpoche. Thank you, Geshe-la. Thank you, Geshe-ma. Thank you, Ms.Katrina Brooks.
Oh, yeah, thank you. That's all.
Yeah, good night, Rinpoche. Yeah. Hey.
Oh, yeah. Gosh.